Hello everybody, welcome to more Political Access. Today let's take a closer look at the U.S. Senate election in Iowa. It's not really the juiciest race to look at, it's not expected to be overly competitive, but let's take a look at it anyway. Let's get on Ballotpedia and get a little bit of background about this race. The Republican nominee is Chuck Grassley. He is running for re-election to his 8th term. He's been in there a long time, since 1981. His birthday is actually tomorrow, September 17th. He will be 89 years old. 6 years ago, he won re-election by over 24 points. His opponent is Michael, or Mike Franken. He's a retired Navy admiral, and he was the runner-up for this nomination 2 years ago, so he's back at it. This time, he's got the nomination. And speaking of primaries, this year for the Democratic nomination, Franken did have a competitive primary. He got 55% of the vote over one-term U.S. Representative Abby Finkenauer, who got 40%. Franken might have been viewed as the underdog in that race, but he had momentum late, and he pulled out a clean win. Meanwhile, Chuck Grassley, he didn't really have much of a competitive primary. He won with over 73% of the vote over Jim Carlin with 26%. There was some talk of Pat Grassley, which is Chuck Grassley's grandson. He might run for the seat if Chuck Grassley retired. That didn't happen, and Chuck Grassley coasted to the nomination. If you care about raw vote totals from primaries, here on Ballotpedia, the Democrats have almost 156,000 votes, and the Republicans had almost 190,000 votes. So that's a bit of a lead for the Republicans, but not a blowout. I wouldn't look too far into those numbers, but some people do care about those numbers. So if we scroll further down here, you can take a look at campaign finance, if that's your thing. Grassley does have more cash, that makes sense. However, there's not a ton of money pouring into this race, as it's not expected to be super competitive. And we can go down here to see how this is rated, according to the rating sites. And all three of them, Cook, Inside Elections, and Sabato, they all have it as solid or safe Republican. My own rating is safe Republican. I think it will be over a 10-point margin. Grassley has won with very wide margins in the past. It will probably be a narrower margin this time around. Given polarization, as well as given Chuck Grassley's age, I think some people might be thinking it's time for a change. Not that Franken is all that youthful. And in this case, Chuck Grassley, with all his seniority, there might be some defectors toward Franken, but I don't think enough to get it under 10 points. Personally, I think Grassley should have retired and called it a career probably 6 years ago. You'd hate to see somebody die in office, but unfortunately that does appear to be more and more likely as time goes on. So let's move on and take a look at the county voting trends. This table here shows us that 40% of the population lives in 6 counties that are solid Democratic, and that is defined as a county that voted for Obama, then Clinton, then Biden. 31.6% of the population lives in 61 counties that are solidly Republican, and that is the opposite. They voted for Romney, Trump, and Trump. But then this last number is the key number. 28.3% of the population lives in 32 counties that are trending Republican on a presidential level. Now, those are counties that voted for Barack Obama back in 2012, but then switched to Trump and stuck with Trump in 2016 and 20 respectively. If we go down here, we can see those are those lighter red counties. Most of that is in the eastern part of Iowa, and a lot of that did used to be blue back in the 90s and 2000s, but it has shifted toward the right. And Democrats have no counties that are trending toward them at all, at least as far as flipping on a presidential level. Some of these counties certainly may be shifting toward the left, but haven't flipped yet. The Democrats, their strength are those blue counties. That is where most of the population is. That is Polk County with Des Moines, Lynn County with Cedar Rapids, and Scott County, which has 2 of the Quad Cities in it. So let's switch over to YouTube and take a look at their channels to see what kind of content they have on there. And Chuck Grassley, he does have some ads down here, but there's not much else. Before that, it goes back 5 years to his old content. He does have an official Senate channel, but as far as his current campaign, I think this is it. And let's compare to Mike Franken's channel. Here, Franken, he's got a few ads out. He's got some older videos where he introduces himself, and he has his primary campaign he's launching. And then he has some older media appearances that aren't going to be relevant to this campaign. Let's talk about debates. Here's an article. It says there is one teed up for October 6th. That's great. Wouldn't want to see Grassley trying to not debate. He's done it so many times before, I would think that he would breeze through this. But he also could be nervous that he might look a little bit too old, too out of touch. But at this point, I think he's enough of an Iowa legend that he thinks this is in the bag. And then here's a news article about Franken. Basically, his message is to try to find middle of the road, down the middle positions that are going to be more popular. He knows he's an underdog. He's hoping to cast himself as more of a centrist. Hope Grassley has some missteps and that the national environment shifts just enough to where somehow he can pull out a win. But it is going to be a tough road for him at this point. But as I always say, anything could happen. So let's get over to Wikipedia and take a look at the polling. In the aggregate, on 538, Grassley's at 48.8%, Franken's at 41.5%. That's a modest 7.3% lead for Grassley. Let's go down to the individual polls, and there's not that many of them. As I said, this isn't widely expected to be a super competitive race. The most recent one from earlier this month shows Grassley at 48, Franken's at 44. That poll is from the Franken campaign, so take it a little bit with a grain of salt. All the other polls do show Grassley with a lead. We can also compare these polls to 2016 to see how accurate they were there. And back then, Chuck Grassley won with over 60% of the vote. Patty Judge was under 36%. And if we look back to September, at that point they probably underestimated Grassley by a few points. By Election Day, the polls might have been off by a few points as well. On that huge of a lead, it's not as big of a deal. Emerson College did have Grassley at 60, but Patty Judge, they underestimated her by several points. And finally, let's take a look at the markets to see where people are putting their money. And there, the Republican Chuck Grassley is at 94 cents. The Democratic candidate, Mike Franken, is at 7 cents. Anytime you're above 90, in this case even the mid-90s, it would take something catastrophic to change things. So I do think Grassley is heavily favored. Probably 10 to 15 points would be my guess. If it's a real bad night, maybe it gets under 10. So anyway, that's an in-depth look at this Iowa Senate race. Let me know in the comments down below. Are you following this race? Did I miss anything? What do you think the margin's going to be? And if you enjoy this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video.